What is up, theology nerds? This is Trip, and you're listening to Homebrewed Christianity. And this is a little special episode. Why? Why is it special, Trip, you may say? Because longtime friend of the podcast, Tony Jones, is back. That's right. Over the 13 years of this podcast, he's been on a ton of times. Normally, we come up with ways in which we argue. It's in both of our love languages, to have a good theological argument. But today, oh no, Tony he's been tamed. I think he's really letting that frustration go. He's found a type of humility and calmness. Maybe he's been out in the woods a lot because he does run the Reverend Hunter podcast. Maybe he's just lockdown's getting to him. I don't know. But it was just too comfortable and enjoyable of a conversation. I don't know what to do with this. But Tony Jones comes on, and do we battle it out? No. We just start telling stories, amazing stories, some of my favorite times of things we've done together over the last 13 years, 15 years of friendship. You hear about some crazy live podcast events. You hear about one of the podcasts we recorded that has never been up on the internet. You hear about our thoughts and experiences being part of the emerging church movement. Sweet stories about a whole bunch of our friends like Phyllis Tickle, Anthony Smith, Scott McKnight, Brian McLaren, Mark Scandrett, Doug Padgett. We have ourselves a good old time, and I hope you do too. Towards the end of the conversation, we talk about our thoughts and feelings coming hopefully towards the end of the COVID experience, and thinking about how the emerging church wrapped up and the changing shape of religion and culture, the tensions and stuff in America. And we postulate, think through, have some visions and discussions around the future of things that surprisingly we had similar intuitions, and they're quite different than we thought. So, in this episode, if you tolerate entertaining stories for a while, you find out that we kind of agree that we were both wrong on some pretty significant things over the last 13 years of us chatting it up on the podcast. So thank you for listening. Thank you all who have been listeners to the podcast, no matter how long you've been listening. Thank you tons. If you love the podcast, tell your friends, share it. I'd really, 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 really love it if more of you joined the Homebrewed community. The Homebrewed community is not just the way in which you support the podcast, donating each month, but the Homebrewed community are also the people who get access to tons of extra stuff. There's a private podcast feed for members. They get access to audio versions of all the lectures and things from different classes. They get lectures and stuff I'm doing when I travel, audio version of me reading my book and making commentary on it, me attempting to do theological stand-up and all that kind of stuff. They're invited into the Homebrewed community Facebook group, so you can hang out with other nerds. But most of all, if you go to homebrewedcommunity.com, you can support the podcast and help me keep it going, spread the word, grow it, and put out more theological resources for people to find online, so they aren't stuck. They aren't stuck without the gifts of so many academics in the academy, and the very limited, often regressive, backwards, less than life-giving vision of the faith that is so popular and dominates the airwaves. So yeah, if you love the podcast, I'd love for you to be a member of Homebrewed Community. Check it out. This is the birthday podcast, so hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody. This is Trip, and this is the 15th birthday of Homebrewed Christianity podcast. And so I'm bringing back on one of my best friends, one of my favorite people to talk to. And though he's quit arguing, I'm going to work real hard to get Dr. Tony Jones mad at me over the next hour. So thank you for coming back on, Tony.
Trip, bro, it's awesome to see you, first of all. This is the soberest we've ever been on the Homebrewed Christianity podcast. I'm sober at 7:30 in the morning in Minnesota. I don't know about you, but I don't know what's in that clear bottle down there, but it might be vodka or gin.
No, not today.
It's great to see you, man. I mean, I think there was a time in, I don't know, the first 10 years of your podcast where it was like I was neck and neck with Peter Rollins as to who had been the most frequent guest on the show.
And the interesting thing is y'all are really wrong for different reasons, you know?
I don't know how I can be wrong when I don't really believe anything anymore. At least I wouldn't say I don't believe anything anymore. I just don't believe it firmly enough to be really wrong about it. If you argued with me now, Trip, I'd probably be like, yeah, okay, I guess if that's what you say.
For people that are new, so in the last 3 years, we've like tripled the number of listeners. So you should all go back and find when Tony Jones had deep convictions he would argue about. We played games a lot on the podcast while inebriated. Au contraire, mon frere was always a good one. We had cornhole battles.
We had some raucous live events.
Oh yeah. So which one sticks out the most in your head?
Man, I think it would be hard to beat the one we did on the rooftop in Santa Monica with Greg Boyd and NT Wright. Wasn't that?
Oh, that was a hoot.
I mean, come on. That's like, yeah, that was crazy. And we had like donated beer, kegs of beer. And I remember we tried to reprise that a couple years later because it was all around like a theological conference at Pepperdine. Mm-hmm. And the people who own that building, they're like, no, you guys can't do that again. But dang, it was fun that night.
The funniest part was, I remember that night was because you and I are on the ends of the tables so we could see each other and kind of, guide what's happening. Greg Boyd tells this story about the first time he encountered a demon. And there's like, he's doing the voices and the facial noises and stuff. And NT Wright is sitting next to me and he leans over, covers the mic and goes, "Do not ask me a follow-up on this one."
It's like if you would have had Frank Peretti and John Stott on the podcast together or something like that. And I'll tell you another one I remember, Trip, is I have such a vivid, like, visceral sense memory of the beer that you brewed for Phyllis Tickle that we drank at the church on the Fuller Seminary campus.
Oh yeah, so that was the stout that I put in the Jack Daniel's barrel.
Yeah, didn't you buy boards from a Jack Daniel's barrel?
Yeah,
and then you had them like soaking in the stout as it was brewing. Yeah, I mean, Phyllis wasn't much of a beer drinker, but she appreciated that, and I just remember the flavor of that was insane. And we recorded a podcast that night in that church, another live event that was super fun. Phyllis and I were on a book tour for the book that I edited about her and her career. The Festschrift kind of deal about Phyllis. So I remember that one. I mean, the
PYM ones are their own
PYM
genre.
ones are, oh my gosh, dude. The PYM ones are epic.
The funniest one was the week after I lost my job. I'm thoroughly inebriated because whoever the sponsor was like drinking with me before it. And I made some joke. And you're like looking at me like, please don't finish it. And Aaron Wyma just grabbed my microphone.
Yeah. I think there was one PYM where you were also, that might have been the same one where you were also inebriated and we were sharing a room I don't know, an Airbnb or hotel or something, and you had to get up at 4 a.m. to catch a flight to go to a job interview.
Yeah.
In the middle of like Kansas City or something. And I thought to myself, when I woke you up, I was just like, I don't think they're going to let this guy on the plane. But somehow you made the interview, although I don't think you got the job.
Oh no. I can't even tell that story because I know people that go to that church listen. So note to editor, please edit this entire bit out.
So, I mean, I remember back trip to, I mean, we've recorded so many homebrewed episodes. I remember recording one in North Carolina, I think on a deck at your parents' house with Frank Green smoking pipe tobacco.
Oh yeah.
I remember
that was during we did the big tent Christianity thing there.
Yep.
We had Moltmann at Atlanta
AAR at AAR. I remember several recordings in your garage in Southern California,
and at least one of them was on the internet. My favorite that's not is when Brian McLaren is there, and we have the hookah, and Brian got to my house, and we had been socializing for quite a while before said recording. And like 15 minutes into it, in the gurgling noises in the background, Brian comes up with a graceful way to exit. Because in his head, you could just imagine he's like sober, listening to us talking. And he's like, I'm going to get on a podcast. I'm going to be on the internet with gurgling noises with who knows what in Tripp's garage in California. And you and I are just giggling. He's like, I think I need to go to bed. And we're just like, okay. And like an hour later, go inside. He and Alicia are just sitting there still talking.
Yeah, he was wise in that one, and that one never made it to the public airwaves, I believe. Right? Isn't that the one?
Oh, it didn't. No.
Yeah, we probably didn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's funny though. There's a hard drive in the sky that has all sorts of things that didn't get on the internet. And,
so Tripp, tell me this, 15 years. I mean, it's crazy because of course podcasting is massive now. I've got two of my own podcasts. I mean, they're nothing.
Killer Serials.
Killer Serials has like a grand total of 70 downloads per episode or something. But if you're into TV, you could listen to that one. And the Reverend Hunter.
Or if both of you are friends of mine and you're in lockdown and you just feel lonely, you're just like.
You could just hear our voices.
Tony and Ryan are talking to me.
Yeah, and then I've got anyway. You know, I was telling. It's funny, Tripp, because I had a podcast for when I worked at Emergent Village in like 05, 06. So similar time, I started the Emergent Village podcast, and I did things like broadcasted our theological conversation with Jürgen Moltmann that we held outside of Chicago. And I remember I did like an emergent speaking tour of Scandinavia, and I recorded a bunch of interviews there on a little handheld, voice recording device, and then broadcast them. And then of course, let it go. And unlike you, didn't stick with it for 15 years and, kick myself for that because of course, the medium of podcasting has exploded, but what do you attribute that to, your little genius of starting a podcast way back then when it was, it was an unknown medium?
Well, Tony, I like to talk, and and I was in divinity school and was pretty sure that most people would benefit from hearing me talk to people about the books I read that they probably aren't going to read.
Yeah.
And so the first co-host of Homebrewed Christianity was Chad Crawford, who was a very gifted at like web and all that kind of stuff. So I had recorded some interviews that were for my pub group, and I put them on rewritable CDs. Do you remember those?
Oh, sure do. They cost a little. The rewritable CDs cost a little more than the regular CD-ROMs.
But we would send them to the group members, pick them up at church, and they have a couple weeks to listen to it before our monthly gathering. And he's just like, there's a way to put this on an RSS feed on on the internet. I'm like, what's an RSS feed? You know, and so he helped me set it up and, you know, co-host and everything the first 2 years. And at first it was just to get free books. I was like, once I realized that no one else knew how to do it, it was a lot of work originally. If you start a podcast now, people make it way too easy. The nerd, what you had to do entry. And now I have to spend money to fix things that now the internet doesn't like, but I've always had them like done them certain ways, like coding, how I do the feeds, that it's turned into a giant mess. But I mean, I did it for the books and getting to talk to people. And then over time, I remember Chad, like at the end of the second year, he's like, 800 people listened to our new episode. I was like, 800. And see, now some people are like 800. Like if you had a band and had 800 people buy your album, you're not even going to go wood. But the 800 people in my head, I'm like a mega church for liberal Protestants.
Yeah, I mean, like I think you're exactly right. That's the first thing I thought of is like, what would it take for you to preach to 800 people every Sunday? Like it's hard to find a progressive church that even has that many members, much less that many people in the pews on Sunday. And here you are, you know, reaching those people.
I mean, now, like when an episode goes out in the first 48 hours, there'll be 16 or 17,000 downloads, and then you have 50 to 70 in the first, you know, 6 or 8 weeks or so, by depending on who it is. Though the most popular episodes are always doesn't correlate to the popularity of the person. Either has to be like so nerdy that super nerds tell their other nerd friends, or like regulars that come on. And they're like, Trip probably will talk back and forth with the person, and something's going to get said that's inappropriate, and that kind of thing. So
people who've been around you enough to tell you after like a 7-minute diatribe, okay, shut up and let somebody else talk.
Well, I don't know. I mean,
that occasionally happens.
I mean, you can just edit them out. But when early on, I remember you would send notes on text messages, like commentary on how I should have edited.
Yeah.
You're like,
I'd call into your whatever Skype hotline number and leave you a voicemail.
Yeah. My favorite was the where you were like, Trip, you should really only have one large 9-minute Marxist rant a month. Like you don't do it every episode. But when I was doing for a year or so, Bo and I did live streams every week, audio live streams when that was like brand new. Yeah. People would call in, and it turned into a game where they would ask a question just to try to get me upset.
I remember.
And you were like, just cut them out. Just pick your favorite each month and do it, but don't do it every episode. And
you want to know how much I've changed?
How much, Tony?
Here's how much. I never even once texted you in 2020 or 2019 to say, okay, stop with the Bernie tweets. My God, Trip, stop with you don't even live in the United States. Stop preaching to the rest of us about your Bernie bro bona fides.
Well, I see. You just need to find your mojo, Tony. And that's what I'm going to work on doing. I'm just going to every once in a while tweet something.
Was anyone telling you to stop with the Bernie tweets?
No.
Or was it just the echo chamber and everybody was like heart emoji?
I'm mild for my timeline, Tony.
Yeah, that's probably true.
That's just my Twitter timeline. I'm the reasonable one.
Yeah. This is really sadly the way that, I mean, think of in the 15 years how much that's changed. That how much does the self-curated aspect of social media has dominated who we see on a daily basis and what we listen to and stuff like that. I mean, one thing I loved about Homebrewed is you would have like Greg Boyd on there You had Greg Boyd on multiple times, and you'd have other people who disagree with you, me, Pete, and we would have just fantastic conversations. And I think in that way, I mean, that's why I think Homebrewed was such a pioneering podcast in the religion world, because you're so deeply engaged and such a committed host, but you also brought on just all sorts of different voices. I mean, I see all sorts of podcasts now that I think are basically ripoffs of your format and trying to, do what you did.
And it's, if they rip off Homebrewed and then have an even more lame alcohol metaphor, I feel like they should give me 50 cents per download,
Yeah. Are you referring to one called Heretics Happy Hour? I've never listened to it, but I keep hearing about it.
Oh, I don't,
you're not going to name them. I'm naming them.
That's not the only one, Tony. The worst is when someone gets us confused and then they're like, mention something about one of the others. I'm like, no, I don't think that. Never said that.
Right.
Though, the longer the show's gone on, like when people found out it's bigger, and then as I got a PhD and was more, like part of the guild versus whatever, like just someone looking at the super nerds. Harder to get people that are significantly different from me to say yes to come on. Or there's so many other options, they'll just go in safe places. So usually if like an evangelical comes on, I'm friends with them, or there's something we have really in common, or their publisher put them up to it.
Right.
So
when you started, what was your stage of life when you started in 06?
No. Those March of 08, right?
08.
It's 15 years ago.
I'm bad at math. March of 08.
Yeah. I was in divinity school.
You were in div school at Wake Forest, and you were like a part-time youth pastor also?
Yeah. Well, let's see. That year I was campus minister at UNC Greensboro. Remember you came for the event with Scott McKnight?
Yes. What was that event called? I have fond memories of that event. That was fun.
Because we had like multiple small group sessions at the cigar shop, Pipe and Pint in Greensboro, where my small group met. That was like when Scott McKnight was trying to decide if Emergent was too progressive, and he and Anthony Smith had a feisty conversation about the role of liberation theology in the gospel, and I just stayed out of that one. My
gosh, how much do I love Anthony Smith? I mean, here's this guy who's like works for the Social Security Administration as like a volunteer pastor part-time, and he's going head to head with, like the premier evangelical biblical scholar and blogger in the country at the time. It was Jesus Creed and the Postmodern Negro. And, oh my gosh, incredible. I profile.
And if you don't know, Postmodern Negro is Anthony's website and blog.
Yeah. Right.
Like, just to clarify, if you don't know that.
Back when we all had blogs. Yeah, Anthony, I profiled him in one of my books, The New Christians, because he was such a compelling figure to me. Mm-hmm. And still is, what a dear guy. So, yeah, I do remember that. I mean, I think one of the fun things for people who've been following your podcast all these years is, of course, like following your pursuits from div school and ministry and, going after a PhD. And, of course, all the reading and all the thinking you've done, all the speaking you've done, preaching and stuff like that. That's all been, it's not, what I'm saying is, I think for those people who have been loyal listeners all this time, it's not just been about the ideas, but it's also been about like you as a human being, like people. And I mean, as a dear friend of yours, I see the attraction of people listening, and just because there's not a different trip on the podcast than there is in person. And anybody who's like been at one of those live events. And I bet a huge majority of the people who listen to your podcast have met you in person at somewhere along the line. And everybody just knows like you're the same guy. And I think it's that fact that you don't put on any kind of airs, or you don't have like a theatrical front that you use when you're okay, so like I can't imagine that when you know, like if you go out for a beer with Michael Barbaro from The Daily, that he actually talks like that. Like nobody freaking talks like that. That guy, the affectation is off the charts, and you don't have that. So I think that's a big part of it. I mean, it's obviously the idea is because it's great content, but I'm just saying, I think that your authenticity really comes through and has come through for all these years.
That's very nice, Tony.
I know I'm nice now. I didn't used to be nice, but now I'm nice.
I don't know what to do about this.
I know it's really upsetting to people.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, Homebrewed members sent in questions and topics for us to discuss.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And, I don't know how many we'll get to, but there are at least 3 of them that are really funny.
Okay.
Or amusing. We'll do the funniest one first. Is there anyone more awesome to get stuck in a hotel room with than Trip? And why did you call him Sancho Panza or a hobbit? Apparently, these are all things you've called me on the podcast at different times.
I love it. People have long memories. I mean, I'll go in reverse order. Why would I call you a hobbit? Duh. Like that doesn't even. I could have you hold your feet up to see how furry they are on camera on Zoom, but I already know how furry they are. And yeah, you even use a hobbit backdrop, for God's sakes. So yes, I've seen you in many states of existence. Yeah. Sancho Panza, well, that's a little bit more of a literary reference. And that was probably wishful thinking by me that you were my sidekick, when in fact, probably you're Don Quixote and I'm Sancho Panza, the sidekick.
Oh, no, it was Philip Clayton. You called Philip Clayton Don Quixote.
Well, I mean, if you actually look at, like, I don't know about you, but I think I read Don Quixote first. I think it was when I was in high school, like during summer vacation. And I can see the image on the cover of the book, and it's Don Quixote, who's this very like tall, lanky, lean guy with a goatee, and he's sitting on a horse with a spear in his hand. And then Sancho Panza is this like kind of chubby bearded dude on a little donkey. I mean, come on, that's pretty accurate.
Well, I'm just asking the questions.
Now, at some point, I mean, you're going to be like, you get your own spin-off series, like Better Call Saul or something like that, and Sancho Panza becomes the protagonist as opposed to the sidekick.
I know. At some point, I want to get another person that's like younger than me, and then play grumpy old man. Talking to them about whatever is cool on the internet in the fields of like religion and philosophy. But I just need them to agree to do all the prep, and I just respond to what they say. And
right.
you know how like most talk radio where there's a duo, someone's driving, and the work of driving the conversation is significantly more than being the colorful respondent.
Trip, absolutely 100% accurate. I mean, I've never once prepared to come on your podcast for that very reason. There were even times, when you were like, let's talk about how we're going to go back and forth on Au Contraire Mon Frere. And, I was just like, let's just wing it. Let's just wing it. This is your intellectual property, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time prepping for it. And then, to the question of, man, you and I have shared hotel rooms to the point that I remember like having a hard time sleeping because you were sweating alcohol out of your pores. And I know those were in your younger wild days.
You can only really do that like somewhere around 35 or so. I feel like you get like a few coins each year, and you kind of got to save them up. And I just use mine at Theology Beer Camp. That's when I just try to bring the fun, lean in to being 25 again. Yeah,
totally. And you got kids and yada yada. I mean, that's a game changer. But I don't know. I did share an RV at the Wild Goose Festival with my wife, Doug Padgett, and the guy who owned Pathos at the time. That was pretty epic. That was pretty epic roommate situation. I shared an RV for an entire summer with Doug Padgett and Mark Scandrette.
Oh yeah.
And a guy named Dave Laird. That was a pretty epic roommate situation.
Well, it was a rolling revival.
It was a rolling gospel revival. Yeah. But yeah, you're I mean, when it comes to roommates, hotel roommates, you're in the top 5.
That's what I like to hear. So I like to hear I don't want to be in the bottom 5.
No.
Never stole anything, never broke more than one law.
But I mean, I swear to God, Trip, I will never forget that morning of you getting up at 4 a.m. And I really was like, they're not going to let him on the plane. And what an epic weekend that was.
That was the time I met Nathan the first time at that event, because we went to whatever that hotel in Chicago where you only can go in one elevator to get to a top to some like really fancy bourbon place.
Right. Yeah.
And then you were like, just put his on my tab. And so I was like, okay. And
yeah, that was the last time I ever made you that offer.
Well, it's also they were charging for the view, Tony. They were charging for the but I met Nathan there, who then was in the movie with me. It was in Road to Edmond, and is godparents to my children. So
yeah.
So okay, next question. Let's see. This one's fun. What was the dumbest decision made by the emergent movement?
Oh my gosh.
But maybe you should set it up just a smidge if people have no idea, because currently the internet's full of people figuring out about deconstruction, and
oh my gosh,
it just sounds like a whole nother generation just read, Brian McLaren for the first time or something.
It's funny, Trip, because I this shows you how like out of the loop I am these days on this stuff. Is that, and I'm living a life that is way more tightly conscripted than it was back in those days, that I had to text a mutual friend of ours, Dan Koch, and say like, what's this deconstruction thing? Because, and here's why. I mean, I don't even follow these people on Twitter. Back to our earlier point of our siloed lives. I follow Abraham Piper on Twitter, who's the son, the wayward prodigal son of John Piper. And Abraham and I, back in the emergent days, had coffee a few times because he was trying to figure out where he fit, what he believed, and why his dad thought we were the spawn of Satan. So I follow him on Twitter or whatever, and he wrote something about deconstruction in a very snarky, funny way. So I kind of followed the thread and then had to text Dan and be like, what's deconstruction? What are they talking about? And, I was started recommending to people John Caputo's excellent little primer, Deconstruction in a Nutshell, which I think I've sold more copies of that than the publisher has, because I just think
it's great.
It's such a great little book, man. And there's we had some other great content with Caputo over the years, by the way. But the biggest mistake, if people want to read more about Emergent, the new version of my book called The New Christians has a new preface that I wrote called Whatever Happened to the Emerging Church, which talks about kind of the denouement of the emerging church. I mean, I think the biggest mistake we made probably was that we allowed evangelicals to define us.
Mm-hmm.
because we were always so like, oh, we're an open relational network. We're friends. We don't have membership. We don't have doctrine, which I'm glad we didn't have any of that, but we held the whole thing with such an open hand. And it was a very rapid rise and fall. It started, the rise was, evangelicals were like, holy crap, these guys are the next young thing. They're going to help us sell a lot of books. So publishers were like falling all over themselves, throwing book contracts and money at us. And then, that lasted like 5 or 7 years. And all of a sudden we crossed some theological lines. I mean, honestly, at the time, we hadn't even crossed we weren't crossing like the gay marriage line yet. We were just crossing theological lines, like about biblical inerrancy, if you can believe it.
I remember the first time I went to Emergent Village cohort, I basically just explained Moltmann, and people are like, I'm not sure about this universalism and things.
Right.
And it's always funny to think the people in that cohort who were uncomfortable with me quoting Moltmann are now like in very different places.
Yeah. Well, this is a funny thing, Trip. I when you say that, I mean, I think I've had some very odd experiences of like people who were super into Emergent and ran these cohorts, which we had these cohorts, which are kind of like theology pub groups all around the country and some in other countries as well. They're now atheists, and they're now like, troll me on Twitter or whatever because I'm a terrible fideist, because they, whatever the case may be, it's a very weird experience. I think as more time passes, more people are like, boy, you guys were really important in my journey. Now, for a lot of people, the emerging church was like the last stop on the train out of Christian faith. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people would say things like, oh, this emergent church I'm going to, I could, if it weren't for this church, I wouldn't go to any church. And the sad thing is, in the last 2 or 3 years, several of the very prominent emerging churches, including some that I wrote about in my book called The Church is Flat, which is a version of my dissertation, are no longer in existence. They've closed their doors. So I don't know. We did a lot of things wrong. It'd be hard to pick just one, but I think, in other ways, it was like the most crazy, fun decade of my life. I mean, as a lot of people know, I don't know how many of your listeners will know, like, and you were one of my dearest and most loyal friends during a terrible time. Like at the very time when my career was taking off and Emergent was like the hottest thing in Christianity in North America, my personal life was like completely falling apart and I couldn't save it. So I look back on those years with like real ambivalence and mixed feelings about it. Was just like absolutely the most electric, incredible time, and people were flying me around the world to give talks and publishing my books. And it was funny. I was texting with somebody yesterday who's a Vanderbilt grad, and it reminded me that I remember getting a phone. This is like early cell phone days. This is probably in like 2005 or something. Somebody I knew called me, and he was on the Vanderbilt campus. And he called me and he's like, I'm standing outside looking into a window in a classroom at Vanderbilt Divinity School because I see your headshot on the big screen in a class, like a professor's lecturing about you in a class in Vanderbilt Divinity School. So those were, I mean, to get phone calls like that was like, that was big, too big for my ego probably. And that's kind of a long rambling answer. I think we did a lot of great things, and there are things we could have done better if we wanted it to last. But the thing was, I guess we just probably didn't really want it to last. Not in the way of like starting a new denomination or something like that.
Well, I mean, it definitely was fun. Like,
oh yeah.
I think like it gave like just enough clarity that people you showed up at different places, be it, campgrounds or cohorts or whatever. And you kind of just anticipated becoming friends with them. And I think the cohorts things I enjoyed the cohorts a lot. It was more ecumenical than the ecumenical councils that in the same towns.
Yeah, that's for sure.
One of the things that's fascinating that when you talk about, people that ended up becoming atheists, some of them end up becoming like go back, right, and find at home and evangelicalism, mostly because they published something on the Gospel Coalition complaining about us, that kind of thing. In that time, especially over the last 15 years of doing the podcast and stuff, it's funny to see people like, first start hate listening. Right. And they're like, you won't believe this heretical shit that Tripp put on the internet. And then like later they're like, I love Catherine Keller and process thought. Then they're like, I'm an atheist and I can't believe
you still believe stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And they just go on and on and on.
I know, Tripp. I have gotten, it has been gratifying over the last 5 years that, I don't know, several times a year, I will get an email from somebody through my website or some DM on Twitter or Facebook or something of somebody saying like, I'm so sorry. I was one of the people ripping you on the internet for being a heretic. And I was just young and insecure, et cetera, et cetera. And now I'm, here's where I sit now. I mean, honestly, like in the last couple of months, I've heard from 2 or 3 different people who were part of Mark Driscoll's church. Mm-hmm. And were like, I was part of, the people at Mars Hill who were just ripping on Emergent. And I was so, deceived or whatever. So it's super gratifying to keep hearing that, the work that I did during those years it still kind of resonates with people.
Mm-hmm. So, one of the things that I've been thinking about is, when the whole thing started, and you're similar in the sense that the Emergent Village, the theological conversation part wasn't like large amounts of new territory for you, right? You grew up in a mainline Protestant context and were already kind of a theology nerd. And so a lot of it was creating space for lots of other people to engage it, and the big events and all that kind of stuff were part of it, to the reading groups and that kind of thing. So because if you come from a context where deep conviction doesn't correlate to robust confidence and finality in your beliefs, then you just have a different relationship to your theology than if you come out of a tradition that there's some authority structure that's final. And so I get how certain people like swing one way or the other with a type of expectations that they're looking for. And I've just found over the last 15 years, most of the things I didn't know that then I wanted to go learn more about around the question of God, more confident spending more time in philosophy and science about there being an ultimate reality and stuff like that than I ever was most of the time when Emergent was big, and less confident about my thoughts about the changing shape of religion culturally, and the nature of and what the church will look like in whatever the horizon of the culture. And I think part of it is something I'm interested in what you think. When you said earlier about Emergent, didn't want to draw boundaries and all this type of stuff, the lack of having definition makes it real hard to have shared identity. Right. And I think for a lot of more progressive people, you had an option of being less clear or not drawing as difficult boundaries when in America, the inertia of Christendom was still running. So the assumption was like, this is normative, backdrop is Judeo-Christian values and these stories and things we're familiar with. But when I was in Los Angeles and in a mainline context, I mean, most people had very little awareness of Christianity. Now I'm in Scotland. That's its own thing. It's like one of the most secular parts of Europe. And in both those contexts, introducing people to Christianity and things, I sound much more conservative than I ever would, but it's not conservative in the sense of like closure, but going like, to get to the beautiful part that animates attempting to pray for your enemies. Like, you kind of have to get the theopoetic resonance of the tradition. Mm-hmm. And how do you start to understand it without all the things that kind of classical Christianity has around? Not like the ideas, but the rituals, the rhythms, the seasons, and this type of stuff. I mean, any thoughts about that? I find it, I'm in the middle of processing it, and Andy Root and I are going to do a reading group on it in the summer, kind of looking at Charles Taylor and Rosa and thinking about what that means for the future of faith and community. But
that's, I mean, I have some thoughts. I think that Taylor is just like indispensable for understanding who we are and the moment we're in right now. When it comes to like being less confident of the direction religious life is going and stuff, I think you're right. I agree with that. I think one of the things about Emergent is we thought that when we refashioned the church so that it would be, it's couches and candles, but it's like not just couches and candles. Obviously, right. For us, it was deeper than that. It was like writing our own music, writing our own liturgies, ordaining everyone into their roles in life, like not having an ontological classification called clergy, things of that nature. I guess we thought that they would be so self-evidently superior to the version of American Christianity that was extant on the landscape, and that people would be like, let's see, I could go to this PCUSA or UCC church or Methodist church or whatever, or evangelical megachurch, or I could go into this holistic missional Christian community where people are like trying to care for one another, and we're writing our own music, and we're like cooking for one another, and we garden together, and we share life in these ways. I think we just thought like, well, duh, that's going to like easily eclipse the kind of formal denominational structures of American Christianity. And I think I underestimated like how recalcitrant those structures are. I mean, just this week, the week you and I are recording this, the Methodists, the conservative Methodists are like, no, we're not waiting another year for a post-pandemic general conference in Minneapolis to have our schism. We're just going to do it now. We're starting our e-schism is happening now, and they're just fighting over stuff that I look at and I shake my head and think like, who cares? Who cares? But obviously this is where I guess I'm out of step, because a lot of people care. I mean, it's the same, like I am on like Dan Koch's podcast a couple months ago, giving him grief. Like, you're seriously going to convert to Catholicism? Are you crazy? Why, why would anybody go deeper into that structure? But this is where I guess I'm wrong. And maybe you're admitting the same humility of like, maybe we weren't really in touch with how Westerners like to practice religion.
Yeah, I think I have different questions I ask around that topic than I used to. And I also think there are two parts of it that, you can't test without. But my generation and younger, when you look at the religious landscape, it's different for lots of reasons. But if you look at the possibility of leadership in any institution, it's just different. Mm-hmm. And then if you are someone who would thrive, right, in emergent context, you could do that or get paid 4 times as much to be the best mainline Protestant youth minister of all time, which is, what I did, right? Like, and plenty of people did. And we all went, if we went to divinity school, the average divinity school student in Gen Z has triple the student loan debt of the boomers.
Yeah.
I wonder what would happen in a context where you are 23 or 24 and you didn't have student loans and you could have health care and then take an entrepreneurial leap, right? Like to try something new or to start something. But so often you ask like the very basic questions of how you figure stuff out. I mean, you've had these experiences in dealing with denominations. Denominations love to invite emergent related people around. And then
used to. Yeah.
Yeah. But like basically to borrow stuff.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And then show up at things to recruit anyone that grew up in their denomination to come back to the team, you know?
Trip, I had this epiphany moment many years ago when the big evangelical Presbyterian church that's the closest church to my house and subsequently left the PCUSA and was one of the founding member churches of ECO, which is a, kind of a more conservative anti-gay version of Presbyterianism.
With no deep commitment to environmental justice. So don't that branding exercise.
Yeah. Not eco as in ecological at all. Eco as in Evangelical Covenant Order of Presbyterians. Okay. And Shane Claiborne spoke there, and they brought him in like almost once a year to preach to them. And I remember going out with Shane afterwards and being like, you're coming into this bougie, white, evangelical, rich suburb, and you're preaching like the end of the death penalty, and you're preaching against guns, and you're preaching pacifism, and you're preaching care for the poor. And I'm like, these people basically are paying you money so that they can flagellate themselves and say, oh my God, I'm I could be such a better Christian, but boy, Shane Claiborne talk was really convicting. And then you will fly home tomorrow and nothing will have changed in that congregation. And, his response was authentic and really the only response you can make to something like that, which is, Tony, my job is just to, I preach my message, and what they do with it is up to them and up to the Holy Spirit. Like I can't, make them change. All I can do is be the prophet that I'm called to be, which is a totally fair answer from Shane. But it also, that moment of like seeing him do that, I thought that's exactly what I'm doing when I get brought into a Methodist annual conference and I'm the keynote speaker. Or a Lutheran, what were those called? Synod conferences or what? Like I did all those deals, and you did too, where we would get invited into like this state association of UCC ministers, and they have a 2-day conference every year. It's continuing ed, and Trip Fuller from the Emergent Church and the Homebrew Christianity podcast is our keynote speaker, and he's going to give us 4 talks. And you like rock their world and throw all sorts of crazy shit at them that they need to change the way they think, and they need to change the way they do things and whatever. And then you leave, and they're like, "Okay, Robert's Rules of Order." Okay, do I have a motion that we should sign the petition saying that Disney World shouldn't allow the, evangelical day or whatever? Yes. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Nay. Discussion? You're just like, nothing. They just hired you to come in and give their mess, to be like, oh yeah, we heard from those emergent guys, and next year we're having a feminist theologian come, and the year after that we're having a leadership coach come, because that's what we really need. I just felt like we were part of a turnstile of experts that were used, but nobody was really actually willing to make any significant changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I enjoy progressive youth ministry so much, is because when you're a youth minister, you actually have the ability to do so much more than you can if you're in charge of a congregation that already knows what you're supposed to do when you get there, And what your story made me think of this is, I was speaking at, I guess I probably shouldn't say the denomination, their synod gathering, right, where you do the 4 talk things. And it drove me nuts that, you rock it, right? Like you got them all right where you want. And then they go into some business thing right after it. So
Yes.
I asked one of the bishops if I could, we could switch the order for one of my talks so we could have prayer time after. And she was like, okay, well, I think we can try this, So they do the Robert's Rule of Order thing and done. And I do this like 45-minute talk, and it ends with this like very vulnerable story of the one of the youth coming out at the group for the first time and how they respond. It was like this beautiful story, and I said, so here's why I want you to do it. I'm just going to go straight evangelical and make them say something out loud, right? So I get them to close their eyes, and I was like, someone here needs to hear you tell the truth about something you haven't said before, right? I'm just irritated, and now you can see the faces of the people that are now like, what the hell is the Baptist?
Yeah.
Doing? Right.
This is like a mainline altar call.
Yeah, exactly what I was doing. And while they're praying, I like ask questions that provoke going to some experience where you don't trust the space will actually affirm you fully if you share it. Right. And the whole point of this was like, I think it's weird for you to come ask me, like, tell us about the future of ministry. It's like, well, the future of ministry is finding places where you get to be your whole self and you're affirmed because the one who conquered sin, law, and death says that's my main job. Right. So I tell these stories, and they're all like a normal kind of church experience. Get to the youth group, hold this kid. And you could see everyone that's not the aristocracy is like, oh, I guess you can do this. And I said, well, let's pray. Everyone's quiet. And then someone stands up and goes, and I did not ask anyone to say anything. So let's pray. Mm-hmm. Someone stands up and goes, when I was 14, I had an abortion. And everyone's like, oh shit. And her husband had never heard it before. Real.
Oh my gosh.
And he stands up and he says, and you are God's beloved. And then someone else stood up across her and said, I had an abortion as well. And there were like 9 people that all stood up.
Damn.
And this is a mainline Protestant context. Most of these people are pro-choice, right? But they still had like all this guilt and pain around it. Yeah. And then they end up, we're hanging out with all the ones that were sharing. They share their stories and stuff. It's now like 1 a.m. after they all get done sharing. And the bishop who gave me permission to do this comes over, and she just brings a big bottle of Jack Daniels. And she goes, there's only one thing to serve at this Eucharist. And she goes, it was worth it. We're not going to let you do that tomorrow. You made a number of people uncomfortable, but it was beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I mean, there were those moments. I had those moments too. I mean, I remember vividly doing one. I had experiences both in a Methodist environment of one of those and a Lutheran environment, one of those, where the bishops stood up after I got done with my talk and basically contradicted me. And like one of them, the Methodist bishop was like, I've been sitting in the back of the room reading this guy's book, and it's just not that good. Like stuff like that. It's like, okay, the people seem to be liking what I had to say, but whatever, man, whatever it takes to protect your territory or whatever. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the legacy, and maybe just some naivete on our part about whether those structures could actually change. And I guess they can't. I guess they're going to die. But I mean, quite honestly, that's how I feel about American democracy too. I don't think it's redeemable. Like I think it's, and yeah, as you know, like I'm writing fiction right now, and I'm writing fiction that takes place at the end of the Roman Empire, because I think it's so fascinating, that time period, late antiquity. So anyway, maybe it's just me. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy,
Well, like every time I get messages from, younger than me people who are just now finding it and they're like so energized and excited, I don't want to ruin their gusto. I'm always like, you may fail completely, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Like, you just got to have good friends when you do it. That's if you're going to try to change big things, You should do it.
Yeah, I don't know, Trip. Come on.
Progressive
I mean,
people though aren't good at having fun. That's like
progressive
people though aren't good at having fun. That's like one of the main impediments to progressive.
no, and they're also just as beholden to pension plans and job security as conservatives, and you can't change these structures from within. I mean, that's just the bottom line. You just can't. They can't be changed from within. They can only be changed by death, or I think maybe from without. But that we tried to change them from without, and it never really happened.
Well, one of the other questions was, do you or Tony think we're more fucked? And since you brought up your
probably me, right? I probably think we're more fucked than you do. I think we're pretty fucked.
I'm not optimistic about this human species adopting life-giving ways of relating to the rest of creation to make life sustainable for a significant period of time.
Yeah. I mean, where I disagree with you is I think I don't think Bernie would have I think Bernie would have made divisions in our country even deeper. I don't think that his policies were in any way achievable. And, I say that as somebody who lives in the middle of the country. And I just don't think, I think a lot of people aren't aware of, how, not just politically, but like how culturally conservative a lot of Americans really are. I don't think that's the answer. And I think you were too idealistic in your many tweets and Facebook posts about Bernie during the nominating process. That I'm just way more cynical than that. I would see your tweets and be like, bro, Bernie's not going to solve this. Like, these are intractable problems. These are unsolvable problems. Our country has too many people. We're too divided. It's too capitalistic. It's too run by corporations that care only about, returns to the shareholders. And Bernie can't fix that, and Biden can't fix that, and Trump can't fix that. Nobody can fix it. It's not fixable. Like, these guys are puppets to larger invisible hand forces that they have no control over.
Well, I think there are two parts in general in the nomination committee. The more visibility someone who actually thinks we need significant structural change gets, the more people it might have it as a live option on the radar. That's my general, like, I'm not a huge fan of the Democratic Party, but the bigger problem I think you're getting at is that, for most of modernity, you get a shift after the wars of religion where the nation state became the dominant power structure, and then it had to renegotiate how it relates to religion, and then the economy emerges, and the economy allows us to stay connected in ways to avoid wars and stuff, because it becomes for the imperial center lucrative, right, to avoid war and to tolerate difference in religion. And so the state kind of was the dominating power of the role of religion in the market. And I think now what you're getting at is that the market has become the most dominant force, and it's controlling the state, and
without question.
And part of the problem is
our lives,
yeah.
Trip, not just the state, but also our personal individual lives.
No, I think it's. I mean, here's an example. Like, I'm talking to my brother the other day, and by the time I realized how the world worked, I already had enough student loans that I didn't get an option to do anything different. Right. You think I would choose to be in Scotland to do a postdoc to hopefully be able to get employed in some way that my kids get to go to school for free because I know I'm never paying mine off, and maybe if I work at one, they can go? Like, if I could undo the advice I was given that told me, like, debt for school's okay because it pays off in the end, blah, blah, blah. Like, right. I would. And I know so many people, not just in academic spaces, who by the time you get to doing what our parents told us was winning, you've moved multiple times. So you're alienated from the people that know you.
The land. Yep.
And then you get more narrowed, not just in social media, but you only hang out with people who've compromised their existence to the point that this is reasonable, right? And that kind of the way the market limits your possibilities as human, I think the disassociation with institutions, and especially in religious ones, is intimately connected to it. It is so much easier to believe the gospel when the people that are telling it to you actually know your worst days.
Yeah.
But if you never have deep enough relationships, because the ones you're relating, more and more of our relationships are connected to ends that are monetary and not life-giving. And I just think like the biggest challenge for me, or the one that I'm most interested in, is what does the formation of communities that help people learn how to be human again look like? And then how do you raise your children in ways that they aren't already stuck before they figure out what's going on? And if we can't figure out that, the relationship to your land and your people you'll get more and more distant as you're technically doing good. That's just that's depressing. But I feel like that the idea, like when you say, like, I don't know if the American experiment's going to work, like the idea that every time I mention anything about that, I get the most responses I get on the podcast where they're like, I feel screwed too. Not screwed like you're mad at somebody, but that you live in a world where everyone actually could eat and you could be with people you love and care about, and you don't get to. That just seems like, and then the response is Joe Biden. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, man.
That's why I don't like when you say I don't know how to system. I'm just like,
Trip.
Yeah.
This is why, on a smaller scale, it's why every church that had success, because they hired a 28-year-old pastor who happened to be like super charismatic and a great speaker and stayed at the church for 20 years and built it up into a very large church. And then when they go out to hire their next senior pastor, what do they say? We need someone with 10 years of experience as a senior pastor. The whole reason your church is a going concern is because you hired somebody who didn't fit that mold and who was looked at the church life in an entrepreneurial type of fashion, and now you're foreclosing that possibility for your future because you want to take the safe route, and we really need somebody with 10 years of experience as a senior minister, that kind of thing. It's madness, but it just happens over and over again. It's exactly why Biden winning was like calmed the intelligentsia. Here's what's interesting to me is that, if you would have asked me 5 years ago, what will happen if Trump wins, and then what will happen when Biden wins subsequently or something like that, I would have said like the stock market will hate Trump because the stock market loves stability and predictability. But it's not true. The stock market loved Trump. And I don't think it's just because his policies. I don't know. I don't quite understand the dynamics. But, the people who have money in the market are the people who make the decisions that run our culture. And they did really well under Trump.
And they're still doing good.
They're still doing well under Biden. Yeah, like the market continues to climb with Biden. So neither of them, I guess, was. And I had many people. I know many people in my like white bougie suburb who are like, I'll happily vote for Biden, but I'm not voting for Bernie. Like out of self-interest, I'll vote for Trump over Bernie.
Yeah, I think that's why we're fucked, Tony. And not like because they wouldn't vote for Biden or Bernie. It's because we know we have a lot of big structural problems, and everyone will address them as long as it doesn't cost us anything, is the response of most well-to-do boomers. I've experienced it in church meetings when I was a minister to the 1% on a regular basis. I don't know. Here's what I've seen in a few people that I've talked to about it is that, now it's made it's extending how long you parent and making the way you relate to your kids as like you're just hoping to do whatever you can possibly do legally, or if you're a movie star, I guess paying to get your kid into school on the road team or whatever. But now everyone knows like you can't just be honest, work hard, do good, and you get to inherit the perks of privilege. Now those spots are competitive, and so it's eating more and more time of the privileged parents to make sure their kid still has a spot.
Yeah, man.
And
I know. Look, dude, I have 2 kids at super elite New England liberal arts colleges. Like I absolutely get it and played that game. But I like to think, my kids got in on merit, which they did, but they also started that journey so far ahead of most of the other people in our culture just because the family they were born into, And they already had a running start at that brass ring of elite university education, because I had the same thing and my parents had the same thing. And my parents were the first generation in their family to do it and earned it hard, meritocracy type ways. And then, I had a head start when I did it, and then my kids had a head start when they did it. So it's totally not fair. But also, I mean, even to take a step back, quite honestly, we don't deserve any of this shit. I mean, I was watching a little bit of the news this morning, and there's like this terrible flooding and crap in Mississippi that's overwhelmed the water system. And so there are these people in Jackson, Mississippi who have not had running water for 2 weeks, and this guy's like being interviewed by a local TV news station. He's like, this isn't right. We deserve clean drinking water. And I gotta say, I want to be like, you don't deserve shit. Like none of us, if you think that American democracy is just going to like continue on indefinitely, you're living in some kind of ahistorical fantasy world where you have not seen like every civilization ends. And when it ends, it's fucking apocalyptic. Like the water stopped flowing from the Alps through the aqueducts into Rome. And so all those people in Rome who'd lived for hundreds of years, like, holy shit, we have the best clean drinking water in the world. And then the water runs through the gutters and washes our shit out to the ocean. And, even our shit gets taken away. This is the height of civilization. Like the aqueducts collapsed, water stopped coming, and Rome became like a freaking Station 11 wasteland during the Middle Ages, and artists from Northern Europe where things were a little better would like take vacations to Rome and paint pictures of the ruins as they were falling down of the ancient Roman civilization. It's like the Ozymandias poem. And so I'm just like, do you think that your internet is guaranteed? Do you think you have a right to be on the electrical grid? Like we're all paying into this big system and crossing our fingers that it continues to work. But I tell my kids all the time, I tell them, like, I don't know if this whole system we have is going to still be working when you're my age. So you need to be prepared for shit to go south. And how are you going to deal with that? Like none of this, you don't deserve any of this. This is all a product of human invention, and it's all temporary.
And the sad part, right, like about the Jackson thing, is Jackson is a town or city that the affluent white population all moved out to the suburbs. The infrastructure's underfunded, right? So who is it that's catching the early brunt?
Oh yeah,
are not the people that got the perks of the glory ride of America, right? And so this is what I have lots of crazy ideas. So no one should take this seriously. This is an investment ideas, or whatever that like you're supposed to say.
I'm not a qualified investment advisor.
But like, in lockdown, and we had real lockdown in Scotland, so I get a lot of time by myself late at night thinking of worst case scenarios for my family's future. So, but this is how we've handled this one. The idea
this one hasn't even been that bad. Yeah,
I know the idea of something worse happening and being stuck in a different country isn't helpful. Though I have to say, there are certain worries you don't have in the UK that you do in America for structural reasons. But the post collapse, I think it's going to be smart if churches have figured out how to help community thrive without the infrastructure of empire.
I totally agree.
And I don't know what you have to do to start organizing. So there's some basic skills you can tell, you can learn and churches can do, and they can already start doing it in their community in ways so that when something like this or worse happens, right, there's already a network of people who their identity are the ones that serve like, your water reservoir people, like the people that you act on the land with you. And because so much of the intellectual elite of sorts move around all the time, we don't have those type of relationships that you've since you're kind of recultivating, right, Reverend Hunter style. And I feel like that if I was like, this will actually turn out to be something positive if the church spent energy on it, that's a good idea. Figure out how to have how for churches to become like base communities essentially in imperial collapse America.
I know. Look, I've thought that churches should teach survival tactics for a while now, and I don't just mean Jim Baker selling Y2K food buckets.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about like legit survival mechanisms. I think you're right. I mean, it's potential that when our federal government collapses, that people will go to churches and say, help me out. What can I do? I think churches, if that happens, churches in their current state are woefully unprepared to be that kind of help in society.
I don't know, Tony. I'm trying to win the who thinks we're more fucked competition here.
I don't know if you can.
Do you remember? Here's funny. I think of this. So we're at some event we were all at. Doug Padgett gets up to give this talk, and he plays some commercial, right? And it ends like, "Isn't it a wonderful time to be alive?"
Yeah, I remember that.
You remember that moment?
Yeah. Oh, I remember he gave that talk a lot. Yeah.
That one didn't work out.
No, Doug really, I still think he's really an optimist. It boggles my mind, and he's super involved in, like, he and Brian McLaren have both gone that direction of like getting really involved in politics. And, that's another thing we didn't have that I'm glad we didn't have, because so much of social media now is virtue signaling, like you just have to do your Bernie tweet so everybody knows what side you're on, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I know you were wondering, weren't you? You were like, I wonder who Tripp's voting for.
Or your Hillary tweet, or your, this or that. And luckily we didn't have that. I think Emergent, if we would have had that, Emergent would have collapsed much sooner than it did. But yeah, I mean, those guys, they do still have some kind of faith in the political process in America. And like, I vote, and I tell my neighbors who I'm voting for. Like, I don't do it on social media because social media is freaking ridiculous. But I do talk to people about politics, and the people who are in my life. But I also don't live under some illusion that that's really our way out of this predicament.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about a way out right now. But
yeah,
the other day I was thinking through different moments in church history. It takes someone growing up in the context where the problem has been honestly stated for the communities to emerge or the movements that respond to it to be clear, be it in the Middle Ages and the monastic movement or the Reformation and things. There's always, we will say like, oh, here's the forerunners to write the Reformation and the forerunners to the monastic movement. And then you get this big turn and they become these centers of, education and medicine and all that kind of stuff. But in those movements, like the precursors are people who are running into a wall, just trying to be clear about what the problem is. And it's not till there's like deep resonance around how screwed up everything is that you get, responsiveness to someone trying to live a new expression of faithfulness out of it. And
yeah, okay, I agree. I wonder if that ship has sailed, if that will never happen again. And I wonder that because even when we started Emergent, everything wasn't posturing and virtue signaling and book contracts and marketing. And now I'm like, if Francis of Assisi came along and try to reform the Catholic Church from within and make it more kind of austere and spiritual, would he just be like, you're just another guy with another angle? You're just trying to get a book contract and start your own nonprofit. Like I don't know if it's even possible in the age we're in now for stuff like that to happen again.
Oh, I'm not saying I'm optimistic about it happening, Tony. Right, I'm just saying, like, if I'm trying to frame what the moment is, like sometimes people are uncomfortable naming a problem if they don't have a solution. Mm-hmm. But if you're thinking of these big structural things, it takes naming it long enough for there to be, the possibility. And, one of the other questions people send in is how horrible is the requirement for platform building at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, and part of it was just, because it's 15 years of the podcast, but like, there's no way if I started it now, I'd have thousands and thousands of people listening. I started early and it was mostly because Chad thought it was a good idea. And I was like, oh, you mean I get free books and talk to people? But like the way, if you think about platform and networking now, different than say Emergent Village, where you had a healthier version of the internet, right? So what was the main contact point? Were people that live in your city that you hang out with. Yeah. And then occasionally different, national figures that you would show up and hang out or
right. And you were all reading
Schroyer came out.
And you were reading the same blogs. So you'd be like, oh, I read this blog post by this person. Let's go talk about it.
Right.
You're actually discussing the written word, even if it, or books and stuff like that. But I think there's even something about like, we read this blog post by this person debating this theological idea. Now we're going to go have beers and we're going to talk about it is so much different from like, oh my God, did you see the Twitter controversy around deconstruction? Oh, did you know that the person who's pushing that controversy actually has a new book out that they're trying to promote? I mean, it's like, wow, it's really, I'm very cynical.
Yeah, but I think it is. I don't remember. I was on some podcast. I did a bunch of them when my book came out, as one does. And they asked, like, when you think of the whole emerging church movement, and there's like another generation of people leaving traditional mainline evangelical places, and like, what about that made it healthy? I was like, well, we didn't tweet about stuff, and you only hung out with the 20 people asking those same questions in your town, which means you don't like each other for lots of reasons, right? Like if I just go through my cohort, plenty of us would not agree on almost anything. You had like libertarians to socialists and everything in between. You had every different denomination. People aren't sure that there's a God, to like Coptic Orthodox priest and stuff. And yet those types of differences that are antagonistic through digital mediation are energizing in physical interaction. One of the times, at our cohort, someone who, comes and she's not sure she believes in God and stuff, found out she had a cancer diagnosis, and the charismatic person who's there says, would it be okay if we lay hands and pray for you? Mm-hmm. And you're at a bar in Winston-Salem, and all of a sudden there's like 20 people all laying hands and praying. And the person speaking in tongues gets done, and then the Coptic priest chants. And that was a beautiful thing. And if you ask me, like, what is possible when you have communities grounded in the open fellowship of the gospel? You're like that. There's no chance you would all check each other's Twitter things that are saying they're going to something.
That's right.
Look at their social media profile. And I would say a libertarian Pentecostal, some guys kind of alt-right friendly Coptic Orthodox. I think I just hang out with the Mennonite and try to convince them that the Sermon on the Mount isn't the end all be all, but it's really cool. Right? Like you just wouldn't end up there. And that's sad. That's right. Like, and I feel like you have to, any space that's not already ideological filter has to be, like, it takes a lot of intentionality and effort to make it. And usually what happens in it is something that it's threatening to the version of yourself that most people encounter, you know?
Yeah.
So I wasn't helpful with telling them anything they could do. I was like, oh.
Well, I wanted to, I'll close by telling your listeners something that they can emulate you. I already mentioned it briefly, but you were one of my most steadfast friends through a super difficult time, a time when a lot of other people abandoned me, and a time where it probably hurt you and your quote unquote brand, the Homebrew Christianity brand, for you to stick by me and even have me on the podcast when I was, you know, an internet pariah trying to battle false accusations about me and trying to win custody of my kids, which I did. And the people who knew me knew that the things that were being said about me online were false. Nevertheless, I was radioactive in our world of, you know, Christian speakers and authors and leaders and pastors. So I hope that people who listen know that this isn't like, one of the things I think is so wonderful about Homebrew Christianity over the years and the different co-hosts you've had and all the awesome guests you've had on and everything is that, like, this is who you really are. Like, you're a legit, genuine, authentic human being who's, you know, trying to raise kids, stay married, get a job, you know, live your life. And you're doing this thing because it brings you life to host this podcast. And it's brought a lot of other people a lot of life and joy. And man, I just really look forward to, I hope we can do more live events down the road after you move back here and do a, you know, you and I have dreamed about doing a whiskey tour in Scotland once things open up and hosting a, you know, maybe having a retreat group join us to do that. So yeah, I mean, I hope we get to do more stuff together, but I mainly want people to know what an incredible friend you are, that's way more important than you're fucking incredibly smart and you seem to remember everything you've ever read, which is like, I don't know if I have CTE or something, but I can't do that. You do it and you juggle a lot of things, but most importantly, like, you're just a good human being. And that at the end of the day, that's what I love most about you and about the homebrewed community.
Aw.
No, I'm being sincere.
Oh, I know you are.
I'm a cynical son of a bitch, but in this, I'm sincere.
Well, I really appreciate it. And, you know, I like being your friend, Tony. And
thanks, brother.
I just, and I'm really looking forward to all the public apologies for people that slandered you. I've just been, just waiting. I don't know if those are all the emails you're
that'll
getting.
Happen, right?
Yeah. It's been, it's been a ride.
Yeah. Yep. It's not over yet.
Well, I hope not, but it's getting close, right? Because I really feel like we tag teamed on just how bad things are.
Well, we didn't even get into like how to butcher and prepare a squirrel for your family's supper. But I can go there. Go there.
I know you can. That's if things go south, I'm just gonna be like, I really hope he puts this on Instagram live, like how to.
There will be no Instagram, brother. That's why you have to learn it now.
Be like, I can just learn it on YouTube. They're like, YouTube's down. What do we do?
How do you butcher a squirrel?
Just wait, Tony. In our retirement, we're just going to actually be in a bunker on a farm, posting podcasts, waiting for stuff to go down.
I'm down, bro. I'm down. Let's do it. That sounds like an ideal scenario for my retirement, actually.
Live from the bunker.
Just send us your cryptocurrency. We're in the bunker.
It has emerged and it is dead, but they don't know it yet. All right. Well, it was good talking to you, Tony.
Thanks, man. Love being here.
Way to go, way to go, way to go. You made it to the end of this episode. You heard Tony and I say everything we got to say, except for the parts we edited out. If you enjoyed it, tell your friends. Even tell your enemies if they're, theologically problematic and you're like, you should hate listen to this podcast. And you might get so mad at it, you're stuck thinking about it. And then it might grow on them. You never know. So, yeah, I would love for you to share it. And again, thank you all for listening. If you would like to support the podcast, be a part of the community, go to homebrewedcommunity.com. Oh, yeah. And remember, share the brew.